My name is Lorraine Caldwell, and I'm 63 years old. I've always been the kind of woman who plans ahead lists on the fridge. Bags packed the night before. Sensible shoes by the door. That morning at the Charleston cruise terminal, I stood beneath the steel arch of the boarding gate with my suitcase beside me. Sunscreen on my face, and a little thrill in my chest. It was going to be my first real vacation in years, a week at sea, with my son, his wife, and my grandchildren. The air smelled of salt and diesel fuel, bright with noise and motion. Children ran between suitcases. Porters called out cabin numbers, and I caught myself smiling, imagining the moment Evan would see me. He'd said the night before, "Mom, this trip will be good for all of us." I'd believed him. Then my phone buzzed. "Mom, plans changed. Brittany wants this to be just family. Please understand." At first, I thought I'd misread it. The words blurred, my eyes stinging from the glare off the water. Slowly, their meaning settled like a stone in my chest. I lifted my head, and there they were. Evan, standing on the ramp, phone in hand, Brittany beside him, her blonde hair gleaming in the sun, waving to someone on deck. The children bounced in excitement, their laughter swallowed by the ship's horn. He didn't look for me, not once, around me. The crowd pressed forward, eager to board. I stepped aside, holding my bag close, the noise of the harbor fading to a dull rush in my ears. When the gangway closed and the ship began to pull away, I finally turned and walked back toward the parking lot, the weight of years pressing against every step. The drive home from the harbor blurred into a stretch of quiet roads and gray sky. By the time I reached my apartment, the ache had settled deep, not sharp anymore, but heavy. I sat on the couch, coat still on, and let the silence fill the room. The quiet had weight, an old, familiar kind. It wasn't the first time I'd felt left out of my own family story. When David died, Evan was just finishing college. I worked double shifts at the Charleston Public Library to keep us afloat, morning cataloging, evening literacy programs, sometimes weekends, shelving books alone in the echo of fluorescent lights. Vacations became a luxury I didn't allow myself. Every dollar had a purpose: tuition, groceries, the small nest egg I'd one day use to help him start his life when Evan and Brittany married. I gave them that savings for the down payment on their house in Mount Pleasant. He hugged me tight, whispering, "You always make things possible, Mom." I believed him. Back then, I wanted nothing in return but a seat at their table. But as years passed, the invitations grew rare. "We're trying to build our own family now," Brittany once said with a smile too polite to be kind. So I stopped insisting, started bringing gifts instead: birthday checks, grocery cards, little extras to make things easier. Every act of love turned into a quiet transaction, one they accepted with gratitude but never with warmth. The roles shifted without anyone saying it aloud. I had become reliable, convenient, invisible. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized how long I'd mistaken usefulness for closeness. Love had become something they expected, like the light bill paid on time, necessary, but unseen. The next morning arrived gray and hushed. The kind of Charleston morning where the air feels too heavy to breathe. I made coffee without tasting it, moving through the motions of routine like a ghost. I wiped the counter twice, rearranged the same stack of mail, and straightened the framed photo of Evan on the bookshelf. My hands needed something to do, but my mind was already somewhere else, restless, circling an old memory. In the corner of my living room stood a metal file cabinet I hadn't opened in months. Inside were the remnants of a lifetime David's union papers, medical bills, the mortgage receipts from a house that was never truly mine. And then, The blue folder. I knew what was in it before I pulled it out. The paper was thick, the ink slightly faded, but the words were still clear. Lorraine Caldwell, owner of record. I stared at it for a long moment, the sound of my own heartbeat filling the silence. All these years, I'd assumed the transfer had already happened, that Evan had taken care of it, or that I had. But there it was, in black and white. The house I'd paid for, the home where I was no longer welcome, was still mine. I dialed the number of my lawyer, Mr. Keller. He'd handled David's estate after the accident, a man with a steady voice and a kind patience for widows who ask too many questions. You can sell it, rent it, keep it. It's yours, legally and fully, he said after reviewing the record. Then his tone softened. But if you act, Mrs. Caldwell, give notice. Keep it proper. I thanked him and hung up. The phone felt warm in my hand. Proper. I whispered to the empty room. Like they were. 2 days later, I drove to Mount Pleasant under the soft light of late morning. The cruise ship had left Charleston's harbor long ago, and I knew Evan and his family wouldn't return for at least another week. The neighborhood looked the same: trimmed lawns, pastel porches, the same neighbor waving from across the street. When I stepped out of the car with my keys in hand, she called out, "Oh, Mrs. Caldwell, taking care of the plants again." I smiled. Just making sure they don't come back to a jungle. The lie slid out easily. It wasn't the first time I'd looked after the house, though this time the purpose was different. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was still, faintly perfumed with lavender and disinfectant. Everything was in its place, but it felt curated, like a model home. Not one lived in. I walked through the living room slowly, my footsteps soft against the polished wood. On the mantel stood framed photographs Evan and Brittany at a beach resort, the children's school portraits, a holiday snapshot with matching sweaters. My own face was nowhere. Once, there'd been a picture of me holding Ava as a baby, but it was gone. In the dining room, the quilt I'd made for them years ago, stitched through nights after long library shifts, was folded neatly on a chair, replaced on the wall by a sleek, store-bought canvas. My chest tightened. I made my way to Evan's office, a narrow room lined with folders and labeled binders. In the second drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of insurance papers, I found a legal draft titled Property Transfer Agreement. My name, their names, a notary line, and a blank signature space, dated 2 months ago. So this had been the plan. Wait for me to finish paying, then quietly move the deed into their hands. No conversation, no honesty. My fingers trembled as I folded the document and slipped it into my purse. The air in the house suddenly felt colder, heavier, as though it recognized what I'd taken with me. I closed the door behind me and walked down the front steps. Steady, certain. They had their secrets. Now, I had mine. The next morning, I called Andrea Boyd, a friend from church who'd worked in real estate for over 20 years. Andrea was the kind of woman who spoke with a mix of firmness and grace, never one to rush anyone into a decision. When she picked up, her voice carried its usual calm warmth. "Lorraine, it's been ages. How are you holding up?" I hesitated before answering. "I need your help, Andrea. I want to sell a house." There was a pause on the other end. "Your apartment?" "No," I said quietly. "The one in Mount Pleasant." Her silence stretched long enough for me to hear the ticking of my kitchen clock. When she spoke again, her tone softened. "Careful. Lorraine, that's your son's home." "It's my property," I replied, "and it's time I do something for myself." Later that afternoon, we met at a cafe near the waterfront. Andrea listened as I explained, her brow creasing. "Are you sure you're ready to burn this bridge?" I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup. "I'm not burning it. I said, "I'm stepping off before it collapses." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll do it properly." Within 3 days, Andrea found a young couple, Mark and Elise Turner. Newlyweds with steady jobs and cash in hand. They'd fallen in love with the craftsman porch, the magnolia tree, the quiet street. They made an offer the same afternoon. Mr. Keller handled everything with his usual precision. He drafted the notice, filed the sale, and ensured the timeline was legal and respectful. "You're giving them more than required," he said. Scanning the paperwork. "That's rare these days." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'd rather leave decency behind than bitterness." The final signatures came quicker than I expected. As soon as the funds cleared, I drove to Mount Pleasant one last time. The house looked peaceful in the late sunlight. Its shutters open, the garden still blooming. Inside, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. My handwriting was steady, almost graceful, an old habit from years of labeling library books. "Evan, you said I wasn't family. I'm giving you space to live that truth. The new owners will move in soon. Everything has been handled properly. Mom." I left the keys beside it and walked out, the closing door echoing through the empty rooms like a final breath. That evening, after all the papers were signed and the funds transferred, I found myself driving back to Mount Pleasant. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. I parked by the curb and sat for a while, staring at the house that had once been a promise and then a wound. Inside, it was silent. The furniture was gone, the rooms stripped bare. Only faint marks on the walls hinted at what used to hang there. Family photos, a child's drawing, a clock that had always run 5 minutes slow. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender cleaner. I placed my old phone on the counter, opened my music app, and scrolled until I found it Louis Armstrong's La Vie en Rose. It had been David's favorite song. I could almost see him standing there, turning up the volume with that crooked grin of his. The first notes filled the empty space, rich and warm, curling through the house like a memory returning home. I slipped off my shoes and stepped onto the bare wooden floor. The boards were cool beneath my feet as I began to move slowly at first, then freely, without thought or hesitation. Tears blurred my vision, but they didn't sting. They felt clean, almost light. When the song ended, I stood still for a moment, breathing in the quiet. "You're free now," I whispered. Somewhere in the hollow stillness, the echo came back to me, soft, steady, and true. They came back on a Sunday evening, the sound of the cruise ship horn drifting faintly across Charleston Harbor. By Monday morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, unread messages, Evan's name flashing over and over again. I didn't answer. I knew why he was calling. At a little past 9, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp knocks followed. I opened the door to find Evan standing there, tanned, tired, and furious. His voice came out trembling. "You sold our house." Without warning, I didn't invite him in. I simply said, "It wasn't yours. You forgot that." He pushed past me anyway, pacing the small living room. "Mom, how could you? We lived there. The kids. How do I even explain this to them?" I kept my voice even. "You'll find a way. You found a way to explain why I wasn't on that cruise." He stopped, his face tightening. "That was different. It was just a poor choice of words." Brittany didn't mean I cut him off. "No, Evan, it wasn't a poor choice of words. It was the truth you've been living for years." For a moment, he said nothing. The silence between us felt heavy, too full to breathe in. His anger began to soften into something else. Disbelief, confusion, maybe shame. "You've always been part of our family," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're twisting everything. You know Brittany can be. She just wanted boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated quietly. I worked 2 jobs so you could go to college. I gave you the down payment for that house. I made the last mortgage payment. That's not a boundary. Evan, that's a life. Mine. He rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly smaller. You didn't even give us a chance to fix this. I felt tears pressing against my eyes, but my voice stayed calm. I gave you years to fix it. I gave you love, patience, silence. You mistook all of it for permission. He looked around the room as if searching for something to hold on to. Where will we go now? I arranged storage for your things, I said softly. 3 months paid? After that, you'll manage. Evan's eyes glistened. He started to speak, but no words came. For the first time, I saw my son as a man lost. Not cruel, just blind to the cost of his comfort. When he finally turned toward the door, I didn't stop him. He hesitated, his back to me, shoulders slumped. Mom, he said quietly, I never meant to hurt you. I know. I answered. That was the problem. Chapter 8. Boundaries and Reckoning. 3 days passed before I saw Brittany again. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, her white SUV idling by the curb. When I opened the door, she stood there looking smaller than I remembered, no makeup, eyes shadowed, hands gripping her purse as if she needed something to hold on to. Can we talk? She asked. Her voice was soft, uncertain. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her skirt, her movements restless. Evans, not himself, she said finally. He blames me for what happened. But I know this isn't just about me. I waited, giving her space to find her words. I was scared, she said. Scared you'd always be closer to him than I was. You two had this bond, this history I could never touch. I thought if I created space, he'd choose us, our little family. But I went too far. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. You wanted space, I said quietly, not realizing distance cuts both ways. She nodded, tears glinting but unshed. I know, and now I don't know how to undo it. There isn't always an undo, I replied. Sometimes there's just next. Brittany looked around my apartment, her eyes landing on the small framed photo of Evan as a boy, standing beside me on his first day of school. He still talks about you, you know, she whispered. Even when he's angry, I'm sure he does, I said, folding my hands in my lap. Anger is just another form of remembering. She gave a short, unsteady laugh and wiped her eyes. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know that would be too easy. I'm not offering it, I said gently. But I don't hate you. Brittany, I never did. Something loosened in her posture, a quiet exhale of relief. Maybe grief. She stood, hesitated, and then extended her hand. I took it. Her fingers were cold. When the door closed behind her, I stood for a while in the quiet, realizing that for the first time, our conversation hadn't left me hollow. It had simply left me free. The door closed gently behind him, and the silence that followed was the truest peace I'd felt in years. Chapter 9. A Different Horizon. A month later, I packed a small suitcase and drove north toward Asheville, North Carolina, a place David and I had once promised we'd visit when things slowed down. They never did. Of course. Life rarely pauses long enough for old dreams. But now, for the first time, I had no one scheduled to follow but my own. The mountains appeared in soft layers of blue and gray, rising gently against the sky. The quiet there was different. Clean, steady, almost kind. I rented a small cabin on the edge of town, surrounded by pines and the scent of wet earth after rain. In the mornings, I joined a watercolor workshop at a local art studio, a simple wooden building with wide windows overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. The instructor, an older woman named Marjorie, spoke softly as she demonstrated how to blend colors into mist. Don't control it too much, she said. Water will always find its own path. Her words lingered longer than she intended them to. I let the brush move freely. Soft strokes of gray, green, and pale gold melting into one another until the page looked alive. In the evenings, I sat by the cabin window with tea and the kind of silence that doesn't ache. I thought of David, of the years lost to duty, and the strange peace that had followed the storm. One afternoon, the innkeeper handed me a small envelope forwarded from Charleston. Inside was a drawing from Ava Bright Clouds, a yellow sun, a little house floating above the trees. Beneath it, in her uneven handwriting, she'd written Grandma's house in the clouds. I smiled, the ache gentle this time. Maybe, I thought, she wasn't so far from the truth. By early spring, the air in Charleston had turned soft again, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. I returned home with a few paintings rolled in tubes and a steadier heart than I'd had in years. The city felt familiar but lighter, as if I'd stepped back into it on different terms. Evan called a week later. His voice was careful, almost tentative. Mom, we'd like to have you over for dinner. Just us. They were renting a small townhouse on the other side of town, modest, tidy, without the showy polish of their old neighborhood. When I arrived, Brittany greeted me at the door, her eyes uncertain but kind. The children ran forward first, arms wrapping around my waist before I could even set down the flowers I'd brought. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, vegetables, a store-bought pie. The conversation moved slowly at first, like a river finding its way around stones. No one spoke of the house or the months of silence. Instead, Evan asked about Asheville, about painting, about the mountains. At one point, when the table grew quiet, he looked up and said, "You made me see what I'd become." I studied his face, the same boy who once ran home crying after losing a soccer game. The man who had forgotten who gave him his start. Then maybe it was worth it, I said softly. When the evening ended, we hugged in the doorway. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but something truer and understanding. Driving home, I rolled down the window. The night breeze carried the faint sound of waves from the harbor. I let it fill the car, filling me, too. You thought I disappeared. I whispered into the wind. I finally arrived.